From Washington, D.C., this is Middle East Focus with Paul Salem.
Welcome to Middle East Focus. This week's big news is certainly President Trump's withdrawal from the P5+1 nuclear deal with Iran. That deal was made in 2015 to limit and control Iran's nuclear program and create barriers for its movement towards any weaponization for at least 10 to 15 years. The U.S. has now withdrawn from that. American sanctions will return. It is already causing a great reaction, certainly in Iran. The Europeans are also contemplating what steps they do next, as is, I'm sure, China, Russia, and others. There's a lot to talk about, and with me to discuss these issues and more are my colleague Alex Vatanka, who is a senior fellow at the Middle East Institute and is one of the leading analysts and commentators on Iran. Alex is joining us by Skype from his comfortable abode in Alexandria, Virginia. Alex, thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Paul.
And with me here in the muggy studios of Washington, D.C. is my colleague, Ambassador Gerald Feierstein, who runs Middle East Institute's Gulf Affairs Program and Government Relations. Jerry, welcome to the show once again.
Delighted to be here.
And Jerry, let me start with you. President Trump, maybe not unexpected, he's been saying he's going to do it since he was a candidate. What took him so long, and where do you think his administration thinks it's going from here?
Well, both good questions. I think that the assumption is that President Trump, despite his determination, and he often referred to the Iran nuclear deal as the worst deal ever negotiated, promised in the campaign that he would tear it up on his first day in office, but it's taken him 15 months, and primarily because influential members of his own administration, including particularly Secretary of Defense Mattis, but also previous national security advisors and Secretary of State Tillerson, had pressed him vigorously not to do that. Now that all except Mattis have departed, those voices in the administration who advocated against tearing up the nuclear deal have departed, and the crew that is now in the White House advising the president is much more inclined to agree with him that the nuclear deal was a bad arrangement.
Well, let me ask about that. I mean, it would seem to me that some of his advisors, John Bolton, maybe Mike Pompeo, are real hawks on Iran. John Bolton wants perhaps war on Iran, regime change, whereas it strikes me that Trump, and he said it in his announcement, he wants a deal. He wants a much better deal, but in a sense, he wants a deal with Iran, provided it's a much better one that includes sunset clauses, missile agreements, and non-intervention in the region. So here we are. He did withdraw as promised. Where do you think he thinks he's going?
Well, it's a very good question. I think that
I'm paid to ask good questions, by the way. Thank you.
And I'm paid to duck the answers, actually.
Good luck. Yeah.
But I think that while he has said that he wants a new and better deal, the bar that he's set in order to achieve that is so high that I would say almost all, if not all, outside observers would agree that it would be almost impossible for Iran to agree to anything. And it comes back to the philosophy of the negotiations, which is that while everybody agreed that the JCPOA, the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, was flawed, it was nevertheless probably the best achievable agreement at that particular time. So it's unlikely that even if he is determined to try to negotiate a better agreement, it's unlikely that he would be able to get there.
Alex, let me turn to you. Take us to the mood maybe in Tehran, initial reactions. But I want to ask you, let's go beyond that. I mean, this is bad news for Iran. I mean, yes, they can make hay and blame President Trump, and he withdrew, and they did not really violate the agreement. It's good PR, but having sanctions slapped back and so on is going to be costly. So give me the short-term reaction and the longer-term predicament that they're in.
I mean, in the short term, Paul, what they're hoping will happen, and this is a big hope on their part because history is not on their side, they're hoping that the Europeans on this occasion will turn this particular American president down and choose not to go hand in hand with America on this critical question about international security. That's what Tehran is hoping. That's what we heard from Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei today. But he said a bit more than that. He said it's no longer just about words. We had an agreement with the Americans. They walked away. You can't trust these Westerners. You need something much more tangible. Give me something. And that was a specific request to Rouhani. Give me something that proves to me we're not going to be trumped again, if you will, by the Europeans this time around. Now,
but what does that mean, Alex? I mean, the Europeans, I suppose, want to be able to do business with Iran. They're going to stay with the deal. I mean, they've made that public. The challenge for them is going to be being able to do business in Iran if the U.S. clamps back secondary sanctions that sanctions companies that do business in Iran. So what wiggle room do the Europeans have, and what can Rouhani or the Supreme Leader get?
You put your finger right on it. It's about the economy. The Iranians couldn't care less, frankly, let's be honest about it, whether they have relations with the United States or not. In an ideal world, some of them wanted to see that, but really this is about making sure this Iranian economy doesn't implode at home, which creates its own kind of severe consequences for the regime. Now, in terms of what they're expecting from the Europeans, you're right. And as I said before, history has shown, like in the 1990s and in the George Bush presidency, when push comes to shove, the Europeans side with America. This time around, the test for Iran is how do they make sure they win the sort of international battle of a public opinion on this issue. So that's why, for instance, I don't expect the Iranians are going to dash for a nuclear bomb tomorrow. I don't expect that Iranian forces in the region are going to be hitting American targets anytime soon. I think the Iranians want to show themselves to be sort of the adults in the room vis-a-vis President Trump. And what the Europeans need to do, and this is something they have on their books in terms of legislation, they can hit back against the United States and secondary sanctions. Now, that would be a major escalation between Europe and U.S. It'll go far beyond the Iranian question. But that is something you hear corners in Europe talk about, certainly in Germany and other places that have a very different view on Iran. They're saying, we're not going to sit here and just take it anymore, because it's not Iran, it's also Russia. You're telling us what we can do around the world. And perhaps, and again, this is a big if, perhaps there will be a pushback against Trump, which will impact U.S. calculations in the longer term.
I'll come back to you, Alex, for a bit more on Iran. Let me go back to Jerry and, look at reactions in the region. Certainly, Israel welcomed the move, and they had released a lot of information before the move to make sure it happened. The main Gulf partners of the U.S. Also came out in favor. However, in the year preceding this, correct me if I'm wrong, I didn't sense that the Gulf countries were really pushing for the U.S. to withdraw from the deal. Maybe Prime Minister Netanyahu was, although other Israeli officials seemed not to be. So what can you tell us about what preceded this, and how are those regional partners feeling? Is it a bit of, that's a nice move, but we're kind of scared about what the repercussions might be?
Well, and I think, and this is, although the Israelis and the major Gulf states, Saudi Arabia, UAE in particular, share a common concern about Iranian behavior, about Iranian actions, there are distinctions between the two. And the Israelis have been particularly concerned over the years about the Iranian nuclear weapons programs, and therefore objected to the JCPOA on those grounds, that they didn't believe that the agreement that was negotiated gave sufficient guarantees that the Iranians would not develop a nuclear weapons capability down the road. On the other hand, the Gulf states, while they certainly shared concerns about the program, about the weapons program, nevertheless have always been clear that the thing that was of greatest concern was Iran's behavior outside of the nuclear arena, in particular, the ballistic missiles program, the interference in internal affairs of neighboring states, support for terrorism. And of course, when the president made his speech yesterday, he did focus on those issues as one of the principal objections that he had to the JCPOA, that it didn't address them. But the reality was that even if we had remained within the agreement, even if we had continued with the Iran nuclear deal, there was no restriction on our ability to continue to pressure Iran on those areas that were of greatest concern to the Gulf states.
Well, let me ask you about that. I mean, now that the U.S. has withdrawn from the deal, certainly the mood is more tense, I would say, and more fraught. There's already very high tension between Israel and Iran and Syria that preceded the withdrawal. But my question is, putting the deal to the side for a moment and whether one day it might be renegotiated or something, in some future moment. But do you see any flashpoints of high risk between the U.S. and Iran, or between, other than the Israeli-Iranian flashpoint in Syria? Do you see the U.S. pressuring Iran, any military movements, anything that would indicate sort of a heightened security tensions?
Well, not necessarily, and it remains to be seen. In my own view, and I think that many others who are looking at these issues would agree, in my own view, the greatest potential arena for conflict with Iran right now is in Syria, and revolves around the possibility of an Israeli-Iranian conflict. We already see a number of tit-for-tat escalations between the two. Would that draw the United States in some way if the situation rose to the point where the Israelis could no longer manage it on their own? That's a possibility. I don't really see that within the Gulf itself, within the Gulf region, that the U.S. withdrawal from the JCPOA actually triggers anything that might escalate into an armed conflict. I agree with Alex completely that the Iranians are likely to be on their best behavior for the coming weeks and months, simply to avoid being tarred as the aggressor, as the precipitating force in a regional conflict. And therefore, it would be the United States, and I doubt that either the United States or our partners in the region, Saudi Arabia and the UAE, would like to see that. Now, I will say that there's one other potential source of conflict, and that is the continued firing of ballistic missiles from Yemen into Saudi Arabia. And certainly friends of mine on the Saudi side have said that Saudi Arabia's patience and its ability not to retaliate against Iran directly for this continued firing of missiles, especially if one incident were to occur where you had significant casualties, that their ability to continue to absorb those kinds of attacks is limited. At some point, they may feel the need to retaliate, and that could also draw in the U.S.
Yeah. Alex, let me turn back to you. Let's step back a bit, take a bit of a historical view. I mean, Iran is coming up on the 40th anniversary, if I'm not mistaken, of the revolution next year. I think President Obama made a gamble. I mean, obviously the nuclear deal itself was very specific to the nuclear program, but he did hope that this was a kind of a gamble that would encourage Iran effectively towards some kind of transition, like the Chinese revolution went from sort of very revolutionary state to sort of a mercantilistic, capitalist, rather normal state behavior. Certainly, I think President Rouhani and Foreign Minister Zarif maybe represented that potentiality, and certainly candidate Hillary Clinton would have, wanted to go in that direction. But, I have some sympathy for, you look at the Trump administration and the hawks who say, well, look what happened. I mean, Obama made a good faith deal, stuck to the deal, gave a lot of resources back to Iran. Iran, yes, stuck to that deal, but pivoted to tripling its presence in the Middle East. It's been in Lebanon for decades, now has a military presence in Syria, military presence in Iraq, and, as Jerry was just mentioning, certainly has tremendous leverage in Yemen and encouraging of lobbing of missiles into Riyadh. Death to America remains, effectively the official chant. So where is all this headed? I mean, beyond the short term that, yes, they're waiting for the Europeans and maybe they get, Airbus to make a deal and so on. But Iran is back where it was in 2013 and 2014 and, pretty much a collision course with all of its region, with the U.S. Where does that leave the country and its people?
Paul, that's what Trump really fundamentally is banking on. I mean, if you listen to his speech on May 8th, he talked about the nuclear program being a horrible deal, a rotten structure and all the rest of it. But really what Trump was talking about was a plea to the Iranian people and anybody else out there who can help to facilitate the downfall of the Islamic Republic of Iran. So in a sense, he could have just come out and said, this has nothing to do with the nuclear deal.
Let me ask Alex, I mean, there are two different things. I mean, it seems to me that President Trump, and in his statement, he said, which is what he said, I want a comprehensive deal, a good deal. The same thing that he's basically saying to Kim Jong-un in North Korea. He doesn't like the North Korean regime. He might like it to be removed at one day, but his goal is to denuclearize, and he'll be happy with that. And I mean, while I see John Bolton and some others are into regime change and so on, and I'm sure Trump wouldn't mind it, but it seems to me he's pressuring them to make a new deal. Now, they might not go for it.
The deal that Trump is talking about is an entirely different ballgame than what Obama thought was possible and ended up getting back in 2015. And Jerry mentioned setting the bar high. And I think that it's not setting the bar high. Really, it's beyond that. It's asking the Islamic Republic to capitulate as a political model. That's what we're asking for. There is nothing wrong with that. There are many people in Iran who right now are supporting Trump, saying that's exactly what we want to hear, because Obama didn't do it and others before Obama hadn't done it in the White House. So I'm not questioning it in that sense. What I'm saying is it's only fair to point out Obama made a judgment call that you cannot get Iranian Ayatollah Khamenei tomorrow to come out and recognize Israel, to give up his ballistic missile program, to basically have the world community tell Iran how Iran can run its affair, including how it treats its own people. All those are fair points, but it's a very different framework of discussions to be had between Ayatollah Khamenei and the American counterpart right now. I don't think anybody serious can right now expect this almost 80-year-old Iranian supreme leader who's been the head of that system for 30 years now, for him to come back and basically say, by the way, just before I die, I want to tell you everything I've been for the last 30 years has been wrong. And that's basically what Trump is asking for. Now, I think what he's gambling on, Trump, could work in a sense that, look, let's just imagine the following scenario. That the world says, we think what Trump did was a horrible piece of, going back against America's words. But end of the day, if I'm Europe, if I'm Japan, if I'm South Korea, if I'm India, I just don't think Iran is worth my troubles. I'll stay out of that Iranian market. What does that do? That means the Iranian economy will go under further pressure than it already is, which will in itself create the kind of chain reaction within Iranian society that might, as John Bolton and others have been hoping for a very long time, bring down the Islamic Republic from within. This is a huge gamble, and that's what Trump is going for.
Well, I'm just saying that I think that might be Bolton's gamble. I think you accurately describe what Trump would like. He would like the current regime to agree to his terms. I agree with you. That is incredibly unlikely. I'm not sure that Trump is in the regime change game as Bolton is and maybe other neocons. But I also, and our time is running out, I mean, it might be, part of Trump's motivation, as in many of his other things, is to be the anti-Obama. And this is a deal Obama made. I don't like it. I always said I didn't like it. I want to undo it.
Right,
that
but Paul-
opens
Paul-
up a possibility
Right.
that, if, there is back channel talks and so on, Trump might at some point agree to a deal that is slightly modified, call it the amazing Trump deal, and that Obama was, such a loser, he didn't know what to do, and get a few.
Right.
And I'm still imagining, because he's basically in it for himself and his image, and he can convince his base of pretty much anything if he wants to, that there might be some wiggle room there too. But we are out of time. I thank you both for joining this hastily put together podcast right after the announcement. But thank you for your insights. Jerry, thanks for being with us today.
Always a pleasure.
And Mr. Alex, enjoy the rural Virginia woods, and we'll see you soon. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you.
Alex.
Thank you, Paul.
And to our audience, thanks for tuning in. Certainly this issue will be with us for a very long time. We'll keep an eye on it and continue to tune in, and we will see you next week.
This has been a presentation of the Middle East Institute. To support MEI's programs and podcasts, please donate at www.mei.edu. Thank you for your support.